Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have with me someone really, really special, someone I follow very keenly on Twitter, and of course, recently on her website and her talks. Someone who watches China very, very carefully and gets information that actually benefits all of us to understand China a little more. Miss Jennifer Zeng from Inconvenient Truths. Ma'am, thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to me and helping us to understand China a little more from the inside as to what is happening with China, with Xi Jinping, with the PLA, and of course, the future of China. So, firstly, thank you for your time and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to ask you just to begin with, of course, the COVID was quite a turning point for China. Things before that, people were not very deadly against China. Uh, Today it's a different story. The narratives are out, the knives are out, as per se. uh, the West seems to be very, very, strongly against China. What has changed within China? How does the Chinese people look at COVID and the change in the perception of China itself? How do the Chinese people see it?
Um, I think for most of the Chinese, because of the completely information control and the only information or narrative they can give from the government or from the media or from anywhere is what the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, wants to tell them. So from the very beginning, of course, in the beginning they try to cover up the human to human transmissive nature of this virus. Then that's how got out of control. But later on, they create a narrative inside China which says that China has done the best in the entire world. All the other countries are suffering, and when a lot of people were dying in India, they make a huge, I think, deal of promoting photos of Indian people burning their bodies on the street because we all know there was a period of time India was also overwhelmed by the deaths every day. So somehow they create a narrative inside China that only the Chinese government or the CCP is the most responsible government for the people. The lockdown is necessary to protect everyone's life, and the rest of the world is suffering very bad about the pandemic, and we have done the best, and we are the best in the world in terms of protecting people's life and in terms of the economy. There was one stage when all the other countries shut down their economy. China still are some of the factories are still working, so many people are importing things from China. So there were at some stage that many Chinese people believe in this narrative. Of course, after 3 years, and there was at some stage, I think it was triggered by a fire event in Xinjiang Urumqi, where people were locked down in their building and burned to death because they couldn't escape. And also a lot of I think tragedies happened during the 3 year of lockdown. People were not allowed to go out to seek treatment, and so a lot of more people died, not because of COVID, but because they couldn't get normal treatment. And even people's, pregnant people got their baby died because they couldn't go to the hospital to deliver their babies. So all sorts of those tragedies happened. And so someday, and triggered by the fire in Urumqi, which killed could be, people say could at least 4 dozens of people. Of course, the official number is about 10 something. Anyway, so there were a lot of protests inside China, and then suddenly the CCP decided to end up it's a very strict lockdown, and without any warning or preparation to the public, they suddenly lifted the lockdown. And so because I think the vaccine quality of China, the Chinese vaccines were not good enough, and also because people were under highly closed environment, they were not exposed to the environment, or there wasn't a gradual period or development of everybody gradually got infected or vaccinated and exposed to the virus. So the hospital has you can say a process to cope with the new breakouts and the new patients. But in China, it's a total chaos, suddenly lifted down, and the people were not given any warning. So people lack medicines, proper treatment, and so a lot of people died during that period of time. So we saw many footage videos of people of body piled up in the crematorium, even in hospital, and sometimes people line up, long lines outside the crematorium, and those funeral house worked 24 hours 7 days, but still couldn't handle the body. So it is hard to know the true number of how many people died. Up to now, the CCP still dare not to release the crematorium numbers during that period, which they usually, it's in normal time, every season they announce all the, death numbers in the crematoriums over the country, and marriage numbers, birth numbers. So now they only publish like birth numbers, marriage numbers, but they have not published the crematorium number yet. So the COVID, I think, for China itself is a huge tragedy. Of course, the whole world suffered. That's why I think the CCP felt very much for the world's effort. One is to investigate about the origin of the virus. Two is, of course, to hold the CCP accountable for the pandemic over the world. Both, I think, there is huge human life loss, and there's huge economic losses. So the CCP is very afraid of being held responsible for that, because they know, I don't think they can bear the consequences.
As part of the consequences of the virus, today the Chinese economy has taken quite a beating. Of course, the world talks about decoupling, de-risking, whole lot of different terms fly around the place. But the truth is that the orders from China, manufacturing has slowed down, the export quantities from the ports are reduced. We see that the unemployment rates of the youth going up, soaring up to about 22% now. Now, this is something that the CCP can't hide. Previously, the CCP could hide a lot of things. How does it hide this, which is going to be in front?
Yes, I think it has always been trying very hard to hide everything. But yeah, because I think it has now become harder and harder for them to hide all the truth. So gradually they disclose, but not the entire truth, but a little bit of the truth. For example, they told us now they, like you mentioned before, the unemployment rate among the youth is over 20%. This number is already very shocking, but it's still, I believe, it's a much too down number. I saw a PDF, slides in a university in Shanghai. Actually, according to the number in that PDF PowerPoint slide, the unemployment of university student is some for some university is over 70%. For some university, it's over 80%. I think that's more close to the real situation among the youth, especially for university graduates who graduated in recent years during the lockdowns, it is the economy has already started to slide down. For this part of young people, like this year, there were another 12 million people graduating from university. So I don't think this situation will be, very promising for this batch of graduates. So if their number is added to the unemployment rate, I think that the ratio is much, much higher. So with such a high uh, number or population of unemployment youth, it is, become harder and harder for the CCP to hide the truth.
Is that why the CCP today is putting out very, very stringent surveillance policies? As a matter of fact, we know about the concept of the 15-minute cities, which is coming up. Every 15 minutes, you need to identify who you are and show your social credit score. And this is this why that they would want to control? So if somebody kind of rebels around this, so they bring down their social credit score right there and make sure they don't move anymore after that. Is this the
Yes.
plan?
Yes, I think actually for all these years, the CCP has been trying to control the society as tightly as it could. There was maybe a very short period of time where, in some aspect of the society, the control was not that tight. For example, maybe in 20 or 10 years ago, people can say a little bit more stuff on the internet. And also at that time, people were allowed to go out of China to seek education in other countries. Now everything, I think, is the CCP is tightening control over all aspects of people's life. And especially now, with the development of digital control like facial recognition, like the social credit system, and especially during the lockdowns of the COVID, this established a very complicated and you can say very controlled system of the so-called health code system. Everyone has to install a software or an app on your phone with your health code in it. When you've got vaccinated, how often you've done the COVID test and the result of the COVID test, all that sort of thing, and where have you been? And they even develop such complicated system as to, like, if you've exposed to someone who has tested positive in COVID for over 10 minutes and within a square of 800 meters, like a square of 800 meters long and 800 meters wide. So if you ever stayed with that person, like you've been to the same shopping market, right? You don't know even that person, and then your health code will turn yellow or red because you've been stay for over 10 minutes with that person in the same area, which is 800 meters long, 800 meters wide. So they called companion and time a companion. So they use very precise location track, uh, you can say software or function, and they have cameras, and they track your movement, every single movement via your phone. So they gave a health code to everyone. So you are only allowed to go out shopping if your health code is green. So after the lockdown period, they somehow still, I think, especially I think in Shanghai now, they've already somehow transformed the health code system They just give it another name, but with the same kind of concept and a strict control. So now virtually everybody is very, very tightly controlled. You have a cell phone. Your cell phone is your digital. You can say handcuff, your digital prison. You carry it with you every time, and they know every movement of you. So I think, and not only track your movement, they are now establishing a so-called unified market system where, at some stage, only the government will be allowed to buy and sell supplies on your daily necessities, and they can easily with this so-called digital yuan, digital renminbi, they can very easily establish a quotation system, quota system, rationing everything you have. Like in my childhood, I grew up in Cultural Revolution. At that time, we have a quota about anything. We could only buy a certain amount of something like meat, cooking oil, rice, even tofu, everything we got a quota, and sugar and clothing to make, texture to make clothing. So, so now if anything happened, they can apply that system very quickly. Again, the system is already in place. So this is all the signs that the CCP is apply stricter and stricter control. I think on the one hand, because they know how bad the situation in China is, and of course, secondly, only by apply such tight, strict control, they think they can survive. Otherwise, people will rise up, people will overthrow the government, and they will lost control in no time.
Now that's interesting that you say that, because Xi Jinping, during his last visit to the SEO, I think it was in Uzbekistan, he mentioned color revolutions.
Yes,
His recent speech also talks about keeping the country together. Be Chinese, stay Chinese, eat Chinese, go to Chinese
yes.
places, wear Chinese food. It was, it's a clarion call for staying together. Now, when
Yes,
Xi Jinping is saying staying together, is it that he fears that things are going to go apart? How scared is Xi Jinping today?
I think he is very, very, very scared. Like you mentioned, his speech, I think that speech was made several days ago when he inspected Suzhou city. And he stayed there for 3 days. And during his 3 days stay there, a certain amount of residents were maybe is close to where he was going to be. Even their cooking cylinders, gas cylinders. Many Chinese people cook with gas. A gas cylinder in their kitchen were confiscated for 3 days. So for the 3 days, they were not allowed to cook at their own home because a gas cylinder could be used to create a blast, to bomb as a bomb. If you lit up a gas cylinder and you threw like towards Xi Jinping or something, it could become a bomb because Chinese people have no access to weapons, to plastic, like to create any bombs. But now the gas cylinder people used to cook are considered dangerous. So the cylinders were confiscated for 3 days. And how about how people could eat in the 3 days? The government actually deliver food to your home for 3 days so that you don't need to cook. I never heard any leaders in the entire world is so scared of its own people. So from this one incident, you can see how crazily scared Xi Jinping is about the situation within China, let alone outside of China.
I mean, you've spoken about the people going against the party. That's one. The second scare I feel that Xi Jinping At the moment, probably he doesn't have is the PLA. Uh, till the time the ground forces of the PLA are with Xi Jinping, which is because he's the chairman of the CMC, he is still secure. How do you see the PLA kind of reacting to public? At the end of it, its cadre as well comes from the same people. They also recruit from the same people who are upset.
Actually, there was news. I'm going to do a show about uh, there was big thing happen within the rocket force. You know, they say the PLA has land force, air force, sea force, and the rocket force. They are responsible to shoot rockets and missiles. So the commander of the rocket force was, you can say, arrested on 26 in June while he was holding a meeting. He was taken from a meeting he was host. So that was the commander of the rocket force. And just on the same day when Xi Jinping was inspecting the Eastern Theater of the PLA, the another commander of the rocket force committed suicide. And now and before these two incidents, another three. Actually, the former commander of rocket force and the former defense minister Wei Fenghe uh, was also under control now, or removed his or under investigation. Let's say that, and there are several other generals, high-ranking generals within the rocket force under investigation. So something big must have happened inside the army. So now we don't have exactly news about what happened, but according to a former PLA, I think he was a colonel or something. I forgot his rank, but anyway, he still got some connection within the CCP. And he said the reason why the commander was arrested was because his son studies in America, and his son somehow, uh, you can say, was compromised by the U.S. and he either sold a lot of information of the rocket force to the PL or to the United States, or he just gave the information out. Anyway, last October, a think tank in the United States published a very detailed report about the rocket force of the PLA with a lot of detailed information, including, all the names of different generals. So that kind of information you can't connect with your satellite, right? So it must be sold to the US by someone inside the rocket force. So according to this former PLA I think of official, he analyzed the, so inside the rocket force there must be something wrong happened. Yes, like you said, now Xi Jinping, I think he has been trying to get his own people or people he trusted uh, to different for the kind of army. But for rocket force, it is require a lot of knowledge and specialties, to control or to operate all these missiles. So if his own people doesn't have the necessary specialty or experience or technology or knowledge or skills to know how to, you can say, operate a rocket force, so maybe it is hard for him to push his own people there. That's why he felt this rocket force is not under his direct control. It's from maybe the previous other factions of the CCP. That's why I think big earthquake had already happened inside the rocket force, with one of its deputy commander committed suicide, and another one got the commander got arrested, and another three also got arrested very recently, and even including the former deputy and former defense minister. So this means that Xi Jinping may have not control the entire army. And according to the Mr. Yao Chen, his former, he served in the CCP's navy before. He now resides in the U.S. According to him, the people, a lot of people inside the PLA, they didn't want to launch a war, and they didn't want to fight against Taiwan, or they didn't want to fight against the US, because they knew the US is very good at precise targeting, and they figured if ever a war breaks out, the rocket force must be the first target that the US wants to destroy, and they are the first to die. So, according to him, a lot of soldiers and military officials inside the rocket force actually don't want to fight the war on behalf of Xi Jinping. So yeah, so I think he tries very hard to, have all his people in control of all the important forces and positions, but still at least within rocket force. The huge earthquake already happened. So, and also people are saying that after what happened in Russia with the Wagner group rebelled against Putin, that scared Xi Jinping a lot and make him think maybe the same thing could happen in China. The CCP PLA has a very strict control system. They actually have three different people control different parts of the army. One, like the commander, is maybe control of giving orders, or control of the weapons. And there's a political officer inside every army. He is control of the people, and there's another person control of working on ideology or something. So in ordinary time, maybe under the one officer, one general is responsible for the guns, and another is responsible for the bullets. So if you must have two people, all the people rebel against the CCP together to rebel. That's how I think fearful the CCP is. They actually dare not to give the guns and the bullets or to the soldier, because they don't know if the soldiers and the generals got all the guns or the bullets they need. You don't know who they are going to shoot at. So that's why bullets and guns, and they are controlled by different people. You must have two people maybe open that garage together to get access to the weapons. So they have very strict system to control everything in the army. But that indicates the CCP has also a great fear about whether they can have real control over the army, and if anything happens, if a war breaks out, whether rebellion within the army will happen or not. That's also is a high risk element for the CCP to consider.
Wow, that's quite a revelation, I must say. Uh, how do the people, Chinese people, look at the factor that the CCP is picking up a fight with India, picking up a fight with Taiwan, picking up a fight with USA, Japan? I mean, every place it goes, and then not even mentioning the small maritime militias that it has fielded in the nations, in the oceans, but mainly two big powers. I mean, both are nuclear powers, India and USA. How do the people look at the CCP, especially going forward with these two as an enemy?
I think there are different kind of or groups of people inside China. Maybe I think the majority, maybe over 60 or 70 of them, were still quite brainwashed by the CCP. Nationalism is the last card the CCP can play. So it portrays the entire world as the enemy of China because China has a history of being invaded and even to some degree colonized by the foreign forces since the Qing dynasty. They've got invaded by Japan, and in Qing dynasty, a lot of European countries, you can say, went into China and made Qing dynasty government or emperor sign an unfair treaty with China. So the sense of being bullied and being occupied, being invaded and killed by the other foreign countries is a deep, scar in the you can say connective mind or feelings of Chinese people, and the CCP is very good at manipulating that kind of national collective, you can say, sentimentality or sentiment to control people, to incite people to hate the world and to love the CCP. Because if the entire world is turning against us, only CCP can offer us help and can hold the country together to fight against the entire evil Western society, or now even maybe India is also included in that evil list. But I think there are a small number, maybe 20 or 30% of Chinese people who've been to the outside world, who've seen the Western countries with their own eyes, or who know how to jump over the CCP's firewall to get free information of the entire world. And so they see through the CCP's propaganda, and they are sick of CCP's narrative, and they have their independent thinking, and they know what's going on, and they are not that fooled by the CCP. I heard the other day, it's quite funny, the CCP's official media or propaganda machine somehow publish a survey like saying, if we are invaded by the foreign countries, of foreign enemies, are you ready to fight for the country? And somebody replied by saying, yes, just give me the gun, give me the bullet. I'd like to fight, but I know who I want to shoot. So he actually was indicating if he has a gun, he has bullet, he might be go to shoot the CCP leaders instead of American soldiers. So there are a kind, I think, a group of such people. So, and these people actually gave themselves a nickname like leading the way party. They call themselves. What does it mean by leading the way? They say if American soldiers ascended from the sky to the street in Beijing, I will lead the way. I will say, I will show them where the CCP leaders are. I will say, this way, please, sir. And that way is to Zhongnanhai. I will need the American soldiers to find the CCP leaders and then get rid of them so that we Chinese people can have freedom. So they call themselves leading the way party. So there are maybe very small number of those kind of people, but there are these kind of people inside China, and of course outside China too. They are already got sick of the CCP, and they want whoever can get rid of the CCP, do it immediately. Will support you. But they of course the tragedy is because of the CCP's tight control. People in China are separated. They live like in isolated atom. So it's very hard for them to organize themselves to do anything together, because all the online forum, online platforms are so tightly controlled by the CCP. Like you mentioned, the 15-minute city. In real world and in online world and in the virtual world, the CCP is is everywhere controlling people. So it is not easy for people to associate themselves, to organize something together. So it's hard to say. I know there are many people want to do something, but it's hard to say how and when, people can have large scale projects like that on the Tiananmen Square some
Mm.
34 years ago. So it's hard.
Absolutely, I'm sure it is. I have two last questions for you. You mentioned about the humiliation of China, and this is something I have not been able to understand. There are two things about it. You look at India, which was subdued for 1,000 years. We had invaders, foreign invaders, and then we had,
Yeah.
to top it all off, we had colonialism. And to top it all off, our country was broken. So if it's humiliation, well, look at India. We don't cry about it. It's our history. Fair enough. Secondly, the humiliation. And on one part, they say that we had an unfair treaty. We had this, people invaded us, and this and that. On the second part, they talk about Sun Tzu's art of war, the 36 stratagems, the art of fighting without, this and that. If they had all this knowledge of art of war, how come they actually went into humiliation for the past 200-300 years? They forgot all their history. i i,
Yes, I
I
think
don't find a connect in the narrative. It's a little odd.
Yes, I think you brought up a very good question and a comparison. Yes, India had also been colonized for a long, long, long time, and why Indians don't have this kind of humiliation sentimentality? I think it's because India, after all, is a democratic country, and but in China, the so-called humiliation sentimentality is incited and by the CCP, and the CCP manipulate that, exaggerate the fact, and they remind the Chinese people, and especially the CCP has been in power for over 70 years. So generation after generation of Chinese people grew up in a CCP controlled society for as soon as you were born. All the information instilled in your mind was given to you by the CCP. I had a very, I think, deep experience of this. It's not until when I was over 30 years old, when I was already in Australia, did I find that all my knowledge about what happened in Tibet was wrong because it's all the lies the CCP told me. But in China, I never knew. Although I had very good education, I graduated from the top university in China, Peking University, and had a master's of science degree, but still I was so ignorant about what the CCP has done to the Tibetan people. So, so because of the manipulation and control of the CCP, that's why in China, they were told to feel that they were humiliated. They were reminded again and again every day, like when it was the day to commemorate the Nanjing massacre, they made such a big deal about to remind us how many people the Japanese have killed the Chinese people. So we must remember this, and we must one day retaliate against them. So somehow the CCP has, instilled this kind of thought inside Chinese people's mind. And if we when we need to defend our own national safety and national interest, it doesn't matter how we treat our enemies. As long as they're enemies, we are justified to treat them, to kill them any way we want. But because and also because they are enemies, they got to be banned to us, and we can't be humiliated by our enemies. We have to fight back. So in their mind, it's they can totally reconcile the two. You can say somehow, like you said, contradiction, sentimentality, because we have to defend our own national interest and our interests, and it is okay to kill your enemy in whichever way you want, and it is great. It is great honor if you can kill the enemy, like which with whatever method you can, but we can't be humiliated by the other nations, so we must unite together to fight against the international world. So I think the CCP has a very cynicistic, a very evil sentimentality, and through generations of grandeur, you can say brainwashing. Nowadays, many Chinese people don't realize how twisted their logical is, and how far away the CCP's value and the CCP's mentality is away from that of the normal world. So in terms of value system, the CCP has established its own value system. It is which is I think entirely against the humanity and the civilized world. So that's why I always think we have to see through the CCP, and I hope the world can help the Chinese people to see through the evil nature of the CCP, and to stand up and fight back against the CCP. And only after the CCP is gone, the world can really enjoy and can feel maybe more safe, and not no less threats from the CCP.
I mean, it's insanity the way the propaganda spins happen from China. Sometimes it's really funny because they contradict what they say themselves so many times, and they say we believe in territorial integrity. Then the neighbors of China look and say, really? You're sitting in our land in
Yes,
most of the places. You're standing on our borders with India. You're sitting in the Philippine Sea, and you talk
yeah.
about it's really funny. You mentioned about the Cultural Revolution and you being in China during those days. uh, do you mind if you tell us a little more and how you kind of realized and how you got out of this whole CCP brainwashing, if I may say that, and how did you understand the real world?
It was very, very long process. I grew up, yeah, during cultural revolution, and my father, because he was an intellectual, he was branded as bad people. In during those days, they gave everybody a category, a class category. You belong to the landlord, you belong to the capitalist, you belong to the working class, that sort of thing. So my father belonged to, of course, the band class. So our entire family was relocated to a very remote small town, and my father and mother were not allowed to live together as a punishment. So I lived together with my father, and my two sisters lived together with my mother. They can only visit each other maybe once a year or something. So in my memory, I spent a very lonely childhood because my family was a bad family. Other children didn't want to play with me, and my parents also actually forbid me to play with other kids, because sometimes kids fight each other, and if I got involved in a fight against other kids, it can be regarded by the CCP as a class, enemy fighting against the working class, and I could get my parents in trouble. So I remember spending a very, very lonely childhood in that remote, small town. And then after the Cultural Revolution ended, because my father graduated from a law school, so he was somehow the CCP wanted to establish its own, justice system. So my father was removed back to a bigger city to work for the Justice Department that was newly established or assumed after the Cultural Revolution. There was a period of time that the CCP wanted to open to the outside world to learn from the West, not only learn the science but also learn from like setting up the juridical system look like very westernized. So my father worked as I think in the Justice Department first, and then he worked as a lawyer for many years. And so I moved back to that bigger city with my father, and then the universities started to uh, resumed again, because during Cultural Revolution, all universities stopped recruiting new students, or they only accept those so-called soldiers, peasants, workers. They all the graduate high school students were sent to the countryside to be re-educated by the peasants. So somehow I was lucky enough. So the university entrance examination system re-established. So graduates from high school can directly go to university. So I was lucky enough to go to Peking University. I studied geochemistry in Peking University, and I experienced Tiananmen movement from the beginning to the end. So I had a very good friend who was at the Tiananmen at that night and who almost got killed. One of the bullet actually shoot through his bicycle. I saw that hole made by the bullet through his bicycle with my own eyes, and another person died in his arms. He found another man was shot. He tried to stop a taxi, to get rushed that person into the hospital. But as soon as they arrived at the hospital, that man died in his arms. So I experienced all these things, and then my health was ruined when I gave birth to my daughter in 1992. I lost a lot of blood. Then through blood transfusion, I caught hepatitis C. Then my health was totally ruined. I lied in the hospital for years. I couldn't work. I couldn't look after my daughter. And then in 1997, I was introduced to a very peaceful meditation practice system called Falun Gong, uh, or Falun Dafa. It is based on three principles to follow in your daily life: truth, compassion, and forbearance or tolerance, and five sets of gentle exercises like including meditation. And the movements look very much like yoga. In India, it's also a Buddha system, you can say, practice, self-improvement practice. So I started practicing Falun Gong in 1997, and within a month, I experienced great health benefit. All my previous diseases were gone in no time, and I recovered my health. I regained my hope for life because I regained my health. So, but after 2 years of I started practicing Falun Gong in 1999, the CCP suddenly started a crackdown on Falun Gong. So I was arrested 4 times and then sent to Beijing female labor camp for a year, and I got tortured very, very badly during that year. And but and they and on the first day when I was there, I couldn't believe myself. I felt like I was sent back in time to the last concentration camp, which I only watched in movie before, but now I was sent there. So that was my first feeling when I was sent to the labor camp. Every day it was endless torture, endless slave labor, and we could be killed anytime, so that our organs can be transplanted to another person. for the CCP to make huge money. So anyway, I witnessed and suffered so many inhumane, different kind of torture, and I suddenly developed a very strong impulse to write a book and tell the world about what happened to me and to the Falun Gong practitioners in the labor camp. The human beings once vowed never again after we realized what happened in the Nazi concentration camp. But what happened to Falun Gong practitioners in the labor camp, according to me, is worse than what happened in the concentration camp, because in the concentration camp, they only murdered you physically. But in the CCP's labor camp, they both murdered you physically and mentally and spiritually, and they turned human life as a commercial product. Every living being is regarded as a walking organ donor, and they can kill you anytime to sell your organs. So somehow I felt very strongly I had this kind of obligation or responsibility to document what happened in the labor camp as a piece of evidence, and leave behind for mankind, so that one day mankind can learn some lesson or at least know what once happened to Chinese people, to the Falun Gong practitioners in the labor camps. So I couldn't, express in a very short period of time what happened after I developed that thought. Anyway, I was lucky enough to be able to escape China to seek asylum in Australia in 2001. And again, I was lucky enough to be able to finish writing my book both in Chinese and English, and again, lucky enough to find a Chinese and English publisher to have my book published. So that's, of course, after suffering the inhuman torture and persecution I started to learn from firsthand how evil the CCP system could be, and how they set up a system to enlarge or to amplify the evil nature in human beings, to encourage evil in people, and to suppress. If you want to be good, you have no hope. And if you want to do evil together with the CCP, and that's the only way out. So because I experienced firsthand about the evil of the CCP. And of course, like I said, after I escaped China, that was already in my 30s. I read a lot of other historic documents, information, and especially there's a book called Nine Commentaries on Chinese Communist Party, which detailed the history of the killing history of the CCP. Of course, we couldn't learn all those in China, but then at that stage, I realized that actually the CCP's history is a history of killing. It started to killing its own members as early as 1930s, and even before it came to power. And of course, after it came to power, every 10 or 3 or 7 years, there were a huge political campaign targeting different group of people. So up to now, the CCP has at least murdered 80 million Chinese people in all sorts of different movements and so-called disasters. Like in the 3 year of Chinese famine, at least 40 million people starved to death. That is a totally man-made disaster, not like a natural disaster as told by the CCP. So after I read all the facts, and also for the CCP's so-called one-child policy or family planning policy, at least another 400 million unborn babies were killed. So it is hard, I think, never, people say some regime or some party kill to gain their uh, the power. But for CCP, it gains the power to kill. So never has any regime has kept constantly killing its own people in peaceful time with political movement. So as long as I can say, there is no other party or regime which is more evil than the CCP, or which has killed more people than the CCP. So that's why after I finished writing my book, I started working as a journalist, editor, and like now I'm hosting my own channel to continue to expose the evil nature of the CCP, and especially in recent years, because the Western has helped the CCP to develop economically. The CCP has become the number two economy in the world. So it has gained more power to do harm, not only to its own people, but also to become a huge threat to the whole world. So if the COVID is really a bioweapon developed by the CCP, it had already successfully killed, eliminated millions of people in the entire world. So it has this kind of capability to do evil to the entire world, but somehow because of the language barrier and because the outside world, like I said, the outside world live in a totally different value system and a totally different world with these Chinese people. So many Western politicians, Western people don't really understand the nature of the CCP and what the CCP is capable of. So, as someone who comes from China, who experienced firsthand the CCP's torture atrocities, I do feel it's my responsibility again, and my mission, my obligation to tell the world what's happening in China, so that people gain a deeper understanding to decide what they should do first with the CCP's threat. And so that I think we can have a better world one day when we get rid of the CCP.
I must say you're a strong person, and I commend you for that. I'm really sorry that you had to go through all those things, but I'm happy to know that you are healthy and doing your work in enlightening all of us with regards to what the CCP's real nature is. And a lot of people in the world have been muted to this whole thing. They've tolerated the Chinese Communist Party ruling China and doing whatever it felt within the country. I think people like you and il- are playing a big part in making us understand the reality. I commend you for your strength. I must say that, and I'm grateful that you've taken out the time to not only just tell your thoughts, but I'm sincerely grateful to you for telling us your story. It's something that we can't even imagine. I mean, you heard these kind of stories from the Second World War, but you didn't hear it post which, at least in the nominal history. Only when people like you come out, we realize that a lot worse things have happened to people right next door in our neighborhood in India. So thank you so much once again, and I hope to actually stay in touch with you and learn from you a little more. And I'm sure the audience is going to love listening to you further. And I hope you do come back on the channel more often so that we learn from you and understand what's happening within China. Till then, thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you.